It begins quietly, a moment so small you barely remember it. You're a child, maybe 6, maybe 8, sitting across from someone who should have been your safe place, but something in them is gone. Maybe they're drowning in their own pain. Maybe they're unpredictable. Maybe they're simply too overwhelmed to notice you shrinking in the doorway. And in that silence, something inside you decides, if I don't hold this together, no one will. This is where the disappearance begins. Not of your body, but of your childhood. You start smiling when you're scared. You stop crying because it only makes things worse. You read tone, tension, and footsteps like a second language. You become the regulator, the steady one, the calm in someone else's storm. You become a small adult long before you ever had the chance to be a child. And everyone applauds you for it. You're so composed. You're such a helper. You're wise beyond your years. But no one ever asks the question that matters. At what price? This is the quiet grief of children who had to grow up early. And it doesn't vanish with time. It mutates. It follows you into intimacy, work, friendships, and the way you talk to yourself in the dark. Because if you don't understand the blueprint, you'll keep rebuilding your adult life on top of a childhood wound. Psychologists have a word for this role reversal: parentification. It's when a child becomes the caretaker, the stabilizer, the emotional sponge. When you're the one comforting, soothing, explaining, instead of being comforted yourself. And it does something to your nervous system. It trains it to be hyper-aware, always watching, always preparing, always predicting the next shift in mood. Even silence becomes something to decode. You learn that love is something you earn by being useful, that your needs are dangerous, that your emotions take up too much space. So you disappear internally, and in your place grows a polished version of you. High-functioning, thoughtful, accommodating, a masterpiece of self-erasure. But underneath the competence is an ache, a small voice whispering, why did I have to be the strong one? Why didn't anyone show up for me? And as you grow up, the symptoms evolve. You might become fiercely independent, not because you're strong, but because relying on anyone feels unsafe. Depending on others feels like handing them a weapon. You might feel uncomfortable with happiness, as if joy is a place you're trespassing. You might equate productivity with worth, because resting feels like you're failing. You might never feel fully present, because your nervous system is still waiting for a crisis. When chaos was your childhood baseline, peace feels suspicious. Kindness feels unreal. Softness feels like a trap. Stillness feels like the moment before everything breaks. This isn't being dramatic. This is trauma disguised as maturity. And the cruel irony is this: children don't choose this role. They adapt to survive it. Attachment is oxygen, and kids will trade authenticity for belonging every time. That wasn't weakness. That was brilliance. That was instinct keeping you alive. But what protected you then confines you now. So many adults walk the world with neglected inner children tugging at the wheel. You give endlessly, but struggle to receive. You apologize for existing the moment you feel emotional. You stay silent because speaking up once cost you something you weren't willing to lose. You're praised for being strong, but all you want is someone to notice you're exhausted. And that fantasy you hold, that someone will look at you and finally understand without you having to explain, that someone will see your shaking hands behind the smile, that fantasy belongs to the child you used to be. Healing doesn't start with fixing. It starts with witnessing. Looking at what happened and saying, "That hurt me. I wasn't ready. I deserved more." Until you do that, you'll keep dismissing yourself with lines like, "It wasn't that bad. I'm fine. Other people had it worse." But fine was just a mask you learned to survive with. So what becomes of the child who wasn't allowed to be one? They grow into adults who tense up in peaceful rooms, who mistrust softness, who overfunction in every relationship, who can't rest without guilt gnawing at them, who confuse being needed with being loved, who fear conflict but fear abandonment even more. This is the inheritance of growing up too soon. Because if your childhood taught you that strength is safety, that quiet is survival, that caretaking is love, then your adulthood becomes a place where you're always bracing for impact. But here's a truth you may have never heard. You were never meant to do this alone. No one is coming to save the child you silenced. That job was never meant to be yours. Until now. You must be the one who goes back, who kneels beside that younger version of you and says, "You shouldn't have had to do that. You weren't meant to carry those burdens. You get to rest." This is the beginning of integration, not avoidance, not perfection, but turning toward the forgotten parts of yourself and whispering, "I'm here now. I'm staying." And yes, it's hard. It asks you to feel the grief you tucked away for survival, to let the tears thaw, to mourn what you lost while holding up a world that was too heavy for small shoulders. But grief is not regression. It is release. It is the ice finally melting after years of winter. And slowly, you'll notice the patterns. You'll see how you become the fixer in every relationship, how you hide your needs, how you overextend, overexplain, overgive, how boundaries feel like betrayal, how silence feels safer than honesty. These aren't personality quirks. They are survival codes. And codes can be rewritten. Start by asking your younger self, what did you need that no one gave you? You might hear, "I needed safety. I needed softness. I needed someone to notice when I was hurting. I needed room to be messy without consequences." Then you begin, gently, to give that to yourself. Not to change the past, but to stop reenacting it. This is how you stop looking for parents in partners. This is how you stop confusing anxiety with intuition. This is how you return to the child you left behind and walk them into a life they never got to dream of. If you were forced to grow up before you were ready, hear this. Your maturity was never the issue. Your lack of protection was. But now you're old enough to choose differently, to choose gentleness, to choose rest, to choose boundaries that honor your heart instead of breaking it. Some days you'll feel young again. That's not failure, that's reunion. Let that child come home. Let them be held. Let them breathe. Because you're not broken, you're unfolding. And for the first time, you're growing into the person you were always meant to be. Not out of fear, not out of duty, but out of truth. You didn't get the childhood you deserved, but you still get the future you were denied. And this time, you get to write it.